if they're,
Just as a
if they're-
reminder.
yeah, okay. If they're having issues about God, they bring up, and all you really can say is, did you take your meds? Because you weren't allowed to talk about it. And so I found that frustrating. And so I did that for maybe 2 years, 2.5 years. And then I worked at First National Bank of Chicago in special events, which actually turned out to be very helpful for my priesthood, because that meant I had learned how to organize things and recruit people and the details of planning events and all of that. And I did that for a year. And during that year, I had a trip to Hawaii as a business trip. And I said, oh, this is way better than 89 inches of snow in Chicago. And so on my first year anniversary at the bank, I quit and moved to Hawaii. That was a really good experience. I knew 2 people, one who lived on the Big Island and one who lived on Oahu. And I moved to the Big Island. And there was a little church that had been started by the Church of England on a little hill, not far from where I was living. And I went there, and I was the only Black. On the Big Island, one of the positive things was that there were only 10 Black people on the Big Island.
Uh-huh.
And so the prejudice was never against us. We weren't enough to be bothered with.
Yeah.
And what I saw as the prejudice and struggle that usually is Black and white on the continent was Japanese and Chinese.
Mhm.
But the congregation had Chinese, Filipino, Japanese, handful of white people, and me. And it was 6 weeks before anybody other than the priest spoke to me.
Wow. So, and that was an Episcopal church.
Yes, I was an Episcopal church.
You mentioned that when you were dancing that the culture was not consistent with, the culture was inconsistent with your Christianity at the time.
Right.
What does that mean?
One of the things that I noticed after I did Promises, I auditioned at some other things in the Chicago area. And I remember going to one audition, and the audition was 2 hours long. And it was really clear to everybody there that I was the best dancer, other than the person who was teaching us the dance we had to learn. And during that process, the person who was next to me was having trouble with the steps. So I found myself trying to help her learn the steps.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then after the 2-hour audition, the dance captain took me aside and said, well, we can't really use you because you're Black. And I said, and you didn't know that 2 hours ago?
Yeah.
And I was furious. I was so upset I couldn't talk. But then I said to myself, I really like teaching. And because I would do that anytime I went to if somebody was struggling with the step and I could do it, I would show them, I would help them along. I said, so I really am meant to be a teacher. And it was a good, interesting experience. It was my first being in Promises. There were 10 girls and 10 guys in the chorus, the 2 chorus parts. And of the guys, it was half and half, gay and straight.
Mm-hmm.
So, and our hairdresser was a flaming queen. And so I was like 21, 22, something like that when I did that. Yeah. So that exposure really opened me up to, there are all kinds of people. You can't just lump them all in a group, because we had a couple of guys that had been, if you could have been married then, they were married for 7 years.
Yeah.
At the time that I met him. And at the opposite spectrum was our hairdresser, who was out every night and just flaming and just all over the place all the time. So I had that experience early. And I had that in dancing, because I started dancing professionally in the summers when I was in college. And I wasn't as sensitive to that those differences. But being in the show, it was like, this is just a bunch of people, and some of them are nice and some of them are crazy and some of them are wild. But I really felt that the teaching piece was something that was more suited for me. And then when I was working at the bank, the last big event that I did, because I worked in special events, was a banking association, big, huge gathering in Chicago. And I was the one who had to plan what was going on. And I had a budget of $100,000
Yeah.
for a 3-hour event,
Oh,
which I thought was outrageous.
it is.
They spent $30,000 on the decorations. And because it was in the fall, there was a lot of food. I mean, there was a lot of pumpkins and squashes and stuff like that. And afterwards I asked, could we donate that to a pantry? And they said, you can take what you want, but we're not going to send it anywhere. It's going in the garbage when we're done.
Oh.
So I filled my car with food as much as I could get in it. And the church that I was attending at that time had a convent next door. And so I took it all to them for distribution. But I was just like really taken aback at the waste.
Yeah.
That they could spend that much money for a 3-hour party.
Yeah.
And not make any arrangements or care that the food was going to go in the garbage when there were hungry people in Chicago.
It must have been the late 70s, early 80s.
Yes.
Yeah. Excess. Reagan. Yes. When did you begin to discern a call?
When I moved to Hawaii, I was there at this little church, and I don't think I missed any Sundays. I was always there. And then after I'd been in Hawaii a year, the person who ran the preschool that was using the church's parish hall decided to retire because her kids, she had started it with another person because they had kids that age. And when her kids were ready to go on to elementary school, she decided on, she asked me, she said, you seem to like kids. You want to do this? Have you done any teaching? I said, well, I've taught dancing, but I hadn't been in a public school setting or something like that. And she said, okay. And so I had the preschool. I was there for 2 years and a little bit. And I really liked teaching. Little kids are very honest with you. And I had the freedom it was a Montessori style school. It wasn't a Montessori certified school, but we used Montessori equipment, and many of the some of the teachers that were there had experience with Montessori, and I really liked that methodology as well. While I was in Hawaii, I got involved with Curcio, which came out of the Roman Catholic Church but spread internationally, which was a renewal program. And on the Big Island, they had a Roman Catholic one, and then they had all the other denominations that were interested did one together. So we actually had, when I went for that, we went up on the mountain, and that's where it took place, which was really great. And it's a lay-led program where there are a number of, I think there were like 17 talks given, and only 2 of them were given by clergy. And during that time, after each of the talks, you would meet with your own little small group of about maybe 6 or 8 people with 2 facilitators who were on the team. And on the last day, because it was a 4-day conference at that point, on the last day, we were meeting for the last time in our little groups, and people that we were asked, well, what happened on the weekend for you? What was this? And I opened my mouth and I said, I think I'm supposed to explore ordained ministry. And they went, really? And I was like, I said that? I was shocked that it came out of my mouth.
Interesting.
I had been struggling with something over the weekend, but I couldn't have identified it as having anything to do with a call to the ministry. So I went back and I told the priest at the church where I was, and he called the diocese and said he had a possibility. the process in Hawaii at that point was that anybody seeking holy orders had to do a 6-month kind of pre-training program.
Hmm.
And that's when I learned a lot about the church then, because still on the Zoom. No, I didn't. No, okay. Let's see. I lost my place.
You learned a lot about the church then.
Oh, I learned a lot about the
when
church.
you were on that 6 months. Yeah.
Because there were about 15 or 16 people in the class, and we met once a month in Honolulu.
Uh-huh.
The diocese paid for me to fly over there every month.
Mhm.
I met my first spiritual director, who started Hospice Hawaii, and she was a nurse and a deacon. And so when I'd go over for the meetings, I would meet with her. And she was very, very helpful. But in the class, all the churches that I had been in prior to that had been like high church, you know. And so we had two people from churches that spoke in tongues regularly. We had very, very conservative biblical literalists, people in the class. I never knew there was such thing as a biblical literalist Episcopalian. So it was a real exposure to very different kinds of Episcopalians and practices and thoughts there, which was good for me to see the difference. And between that and my spiritual director, I discovered that there were different strands of Anglicanism,
Yeah.
and practice,
Mhm.
and that I really was kind of half high church. And then I really was attracted to the Eastern church practices. And I got some experience of that then. But there were two churches in
What do you mean by that? Is that contemplative prayer?
contemplative prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that was another stretching for me. And the experience of the Cursillo weekend, when we actually came down the mountain afterwards, it reminded me of Jesus and his disciples. You know, the work is not up here on the mountain where everything is wonderful and you're feeling holy and lifted up and all that. The work is down in the valley. So that's what Jesus told his disciples, and that's where we went. But
You were transfigured.
I think I was transformed. I didn't look any different. I still had a wild hair.
Mhm.
It's Angela Davis hair.
Mhm.
But the priest at the church where I was attending also once a month went to the other end of the island near Hilo and did services for a Filipino congregation. And I would go there with him. And that was really helpful in terms of me being more tolerant and less picky about high church stuff. The church that I attended in Hawaii was low church, really low. But at the Filipino church, the children wandered around the sanctuary during the service and nobody bothered them. They didn't say anything, but they were free to go. They would get up and they'd go sit with somebody else. And then if they were wandering, the people would, and nobody was going to let them walk out of the church building.
Right.
So they had a freedom of walking. And when it came to collecting the money, they'd give like a 4-year-old the plate, and people would be beckoning them with their finger to come over, and they'd put something in, and then somebody would beck them over and he'd go over there and do that. So the tolerance for children in worship, as that being a natural thing, is something that really stuck with me. You probably saw some of that at St. Luke's.
Sure.
So the church there, I was expanded in terms of who the church is, because between going to chapel every week at St. Luke's, at NCS, we had chapel in the cathedral every week.
Yeah.
Every week we had training with Richard Dirksen, who was the
The
choir
organ.
director at that time. So I learned how to chant everything that was in the hymnal.
Yeah.
And so was very comfortable with that service. But I also, and that was pretty much all white. And then at St. Luke's, it was pretty much all black.
Mhm.
So it was kind of living a bifurcated life, but I learned to be bilingual that way. And that's been something that I've been very conscious of. And trying to be diverse, trying to expose myself, because when I lived in Hawaii, people said, well, did you experience racism there? I said, nope. The racism was between the Japanese and the Chinese. And on the Big Island, there were only 10 Black people. So nobody bothered us. One of them was a musician, and his mother lived, and he played at one of the hotels. His mother was cranky, but she was there in town. You could speak to her and she kind of, and that would be the end of that. And then there was a guy who I never found out what his name was, that everybody called the Goat Man. And he ended up living in the same little community where I was. And then the one other one I met kind of early on, who was a dancer, was a Black woman dancer who lived over the hill. So she was about 25 minutes from me. And I ended up working with her, dancing, and we did some concerts and we did some classes in different places. And I started a dance class for kids and adults in the community where I lived. The only thing that was notable there was that the King Kamehameha statue was there, because I lived in a part that was very rural, It had been sugar plantations. And it was a place where the balance between how men and women interacted had been turned upside down when they started building all these hotels. The men used to work on the sugar plantations and the women stayed at home. But when these hotels opened, the women got jobs as maids and waitresses and all that kind of stuff. And the men were kind of struggling. So that conflict was, conflict and difference in the change. So all of that has been part of my looking at communities when I'm in them.
Do you look back on the racial comfort of Hawaii with longing?
Yes. Probably the first week of seminary. It was just like, oh, I remember racism now.
Yeah. And where was seminary?
Seminary was at Church Divinity School of Pacific in California, in Berkeley, California. And there were 2 Blacks in the class. One of them was from the Diocese of Oregon, and she came as already a deacon and did 1 year. And then I was the only other one. And then the class behind me got one who was a Liberian man, and he had already been ordained, because that was the bishop's practice at that time, was they get ordained there and then they come over and do 3 years of seminary, because they would have had some liturgical training and stuff at the college there. So some of the most outrageous things that I ever heard, I heard at seminary. And that's when I decided that as much as I loved living in Hawaii, I wouldn't go back there. If my bishop would release me, I wouldn't go back. And my bishop was elected presiding bishop when I was in seminary. So he gave me permission to go back, to not come back. I'm trying to think of his name now. He just died a couple of years ago. I can see his face. I'll come up with the name.
Yeah. So who was and I can look it up. Who was how big was the seminary?
I think we had 25 in our class. So I would guess that most of the classes had about that number. And they had some who were doing lay studies, but not on the ordination track.
And did you enjoy it academically?
Most of the time, but I also, that rebel factor popped up in some classes. I took a class that was called Anglicanism, Worldwide Anglicanism. That was in my last year, my 3rd year. And I decided to do it I read the latest historical book on the the history of the Episcopal Church. It was the most recent one written at that time. And I looked in the index at the back and looked for every reference to Black and brown people and looked them all up. And when I read them, I have to add the part that made me really sensitive to that. I got married while I was in seminary to a Presbyterian minister who in his thesis in his theology, and whenever he had to do that, was based on Paulo Freire, who had done from Brazil. And he had said that when you are treated only as an object, it's oppression. And so when I read all of the references to Blacks and Native Americans in this history, it was always as the object. It was never as a subject of a sentence or conversation or any of that. And that really stuck with me. So I did my report on that. And it was the only one in class that no one asked a question. Not even the professor. None of them. And I said, oh, all right. So that's how it is. Yeah. And so that really struck me. And I remember going to a meeting in seminary that was, I think it was my second year, and the white women at the school were having their first experiences of being discriminated against.
Yeah.
Because of the church being so male oriented.
Yeah.
And they had a meeting, and I went to the meeting, and they said, well, we want to talk about having more women's writings included in the curriculum. And I said, well, if we're going to be inclusive, then we should be inclusive. And it shouldn't be just more women's writings, but writings from Africans, from South America, from all of these things. And this lady looked at me and said, I came to this meeting because I was a woman concerned about women's issues. And I looked her straight in the eye and said, and I don't look like a woman, and walked out of the meeting and never went back to any of those meetings again. But some of the most racist things that I heard at seminary. And that's what made me decide I can't go back to Hawaii, because I don't want any of my classmates being the priest in charge of a predominantly Black congregation.
And when you finished seminary, where did you go?
I did 17 months in Mill Valley at a church.
Yeah.
A friend who was a priest, the assistant at a church that kind of across the highway. This was just north of the Golden Gate Bridge.
Yes.
And
I know Mill Valley.
yeah, the minister there, in fact, I saw him a couple of years ago when we went to California. He didn't remember me, but I remembered him. I was their first Black person there, first woman that he hired. And I think it was his, in some way, he had been active in the civil rights movement. And so I think this was like his last shot, because he was going to retire in 3 years. So we both understood that when he retired in 3 years, I would be resigning and going someplace else. But he was very generous with his time and sharing of ministry. I knew I wasn't going to do any weddings or baptisms or funerals, but other than that, he was very sharing. So 1 week I would preach and he would celebrate. The next week I would preach and he would celebrate. So, and then of course you get in, when whoever's new gets in charge of the youth program.
Yeah.
And I was the only Black at the church. And so I had some.
Was it a big church?
It was medium okay. Size, not huge, but medium size.
800?
Well, not at church on Sunday.
Yeah, but on the road.
They had 2 services, but they might have had that many.
Yeah.
A lot of children. I found a couple of pictures of me with with the kids and the youth. But what I realized there was that I couldn't only be at a predominantly white church, because there was a part of me that I never could express. And as nice as they were to me, and they were very nice to me, my husband died while I was there, and they were very, very supportive. I was at church scheduled to celebrate the day after he died, and my boss said that the priest said, you don't have to do this. I said, no, I want to do this. And cried through the whole Eucharistic prayer. And they just waited for me to get composure so I could do the next little section. And everybody was very, very supportive about that. But one of the things I remember from that church is there was one Asian couple there, and then one that was Asian and white couple, and me. And one of the members of the church was an English teacher at the high school, and they were doing a section on ancient literature. And he asked if I would come and talk about the Bible. I said, sure, I'll do that. And after I had done that, we were talking in the teacher's lounge, and I was saying, they were asking me what it was like being a minister and all of that, because I'd only been ordained, a couple years. And that had been a couple of years at that point, a year and a half. And I said, I couldn't stay at a predominantly white church because there's a part of me that I never can express. And they kind of were like, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, at this class, when I was talking to it was a couple of teachers and the guy who had invited me, who was the teacher. And I said, I can go to a hospital and do a visit, but a Black priest could not do that at this church because the men would not tolerate a Black man seeing their wife or daughter or whatever in a hospital gown. And they looked kind of taken aback. And then I guess as they thought about it, they were like, yeah. Because they would not have been able to handle that.
Yeah. So this must have been in what, the mid 80s?
Yeah, I finished seminary in 86.
Okay, late.
So this would have been
late 80s.
A little bit late 80s.
You said, how did your husband die?
It ended up being cancer. He had had ulcerative colitis, which they had treated like it was just a nuisance.
Yeah.
But it was, now I know from all the medications and ads and stuff like that, it was much more serious than that. And it was interesting because I was doing Touch for Health at that time, which is based on the acupuncture meridians, Chinese medicine. I had taken classes in Hawaii, and then I was continuing to do that work. And so I would muscle test him. And when I muscle test him and asked about the cancer, they would say, sometimes it would say yes, and sometimes it would say no. And that didn't make any sense. I shouldn't have gotten both answers. But when they did the surgery, the cancerous part was like the size of a prune, and it had wrapped itself. I mean, the body had wrapped all around it. So it was the size of a grapefruit. So the cancerous part was just a little bit inside of all of this. So I said, well, that must be why I was getting this mixed message with that, because there was cancer there, but it wasn't spreading at that point. So,
Can you move your camera down again?
No.
Because I can't see your face. Yeah. So after that, you came east?
I moved back to the Chicago area after he died, and moved back to the Chicago area because at least I knew where the grocery store was and the bank was, and knew a couple of people from when I'd been there. But it was a near suburb of Chicago, a first ring suburb. So it had all of the issues of the ghetto, transitional neighborhood, and all of that. And it was a very interesting experience. It was while I was there that I heard the presiding bishop, not then presiding bishop, speak, and it turned at a UBE meeting. And it turned out that his father had been the last vicar of the Black Episcopal Church in Maywood, Illinois.
Wow. And
he was there when he was a little kid. And so I invited him to come and do a revival, which they had never seen before, any of the people there. The vestry was 70% white. The congregation was 70% Black. And so they said they were it was a blend, it was a mix. mixed church. But when Michael came, we went and looked in the records and found that his father had been the last vicar. And I don't know if they were still working out of somebody's house or if they had a small building, but they had approached the then Bishop of Chicago to help them to build a building that was adequate size for them. And he promised that he would, if they raised $1,500, he would match it 2 to 1. So they raised their $1,500 and he closed the Black church. And so when I got to the church and was asking, I was hearing about this merger of the two churches and the way it was so hot for people, you know, talking about it, because the white people said it was a merger and the Black people said they closed our church. And so I said, well, this must be, you know, 4 or 5 years ago. It was 30 years prior to my getting there.
Well, yeah.
So that stuff really hangs in there. So at the time that I went there were only 3 people who had belonged to the Black church originally. Everybody else either left the denomination or left the church, never to be seen again. So when he came to visit, it turned out that one of my very faithful, quiet 8 o'clockers called and said he'd like to take Michael and me out to lunch because he knew Michael's father. So it turns out they lived a block apart when Michael was like 2 or 3 years old. And the families used to have dinner at least 3 times a week together.
Wow.
So he came to lunch with a whole bunch of pictures of Michael as a little kid, sitting on his lap, sitting on his dad's lap, talking and all of this. I'd never heard that man talk that much ever as he did. And he was delighted to see Michael. And so I got another whole piece. So then Michael and I went back and looked at the records. And the white rector of the church, which made it a challenge for me because he had died, but his wife and 2 daughters were still active members of the church. And so, well, I'm thinking like, man, how do I deal with this to get some racial blending there with them sitting there looking at me. And they were active members of the church. So when Michael and I read the books, it's the white rector had added to the vestry minutes at the last one. He had added a piece that was saying, I met with the vestry or the bishop's committee, and I told them that they were welcome to come, but they would not be allowed to participate in any of the organizations, not the altar guild, not the choir, not the vestry, until they became acclimated.
Acclimated?
That's what he said. That's what he wrote.
Ooh.
Michael and I looked at each other. And so I said, oh, it's no wonder only 3 came. And the rest of them left. I mean, and the reality in the church is they had never blended.
Yeah.
Because the coffee hours are run by the white ladies, and the Blacks were only allowed to go in the kitchen to clean up after. And I said, oh, this will never do. And I said, how am I going to do this without offending the family that's been there so long and supportive? So they were saying, because the white ones were getting older. And I said, well, everybody should get a partner. And because of the distribution of people in the congregation, they all ended up getting a Black partner. And so that's how the Black women got more fully integrated into the things that were going on.
So that the white congregation could get acclimated.
Yeah. Yes. No, so that was an interesting place. They were very active, not large. I cleaned the rolls after I was there a year, went through and says, anybody seen this person in the last 2 or 3 years or whatever. They were mission. They had been a church. I mean, they had been a parish, but they had lost their parish status with the previous priest, who turned out, I found in finding out stories, was the godson of the bishop, the then bishop, who was a good friend of his father. And when he was near death, the father of the priest said, take care of my son.
Mm-hmm.
And so we put him there, and he was really not functioning well at all.
Yeah.
And when I got there, the agreement that had been made with him, he had gone through all of the endowment money that they had. People told me that they hadn't really heard a sermon, because he would mumble and talk really softly, and they couldn't hear him, or if he was talking louder, they couldn't understand what he was talking about. It didn't make any sense. So there were those challenges there of how am I going to get these people to come together and work together. But they were working hard. They had a food pantry that was run by two sisters, one of whom was the chair, excuse me, was the chair of the Bishops' Committee, and the other one, sorry.
You okay?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
And the other one ran the food pantry. So the two of them ran the food pantry, and they were very devoted to the church and willing to be helpful. But that's where my event planning stuff from the bank came in handy, because I went in there. I went to every meeting that the church had, all the different organizations. The first year, I went to all of them. And at the end of that, I said, oh no, I can't do that. And it brought out, sorry. So it brought out a playfulness in me, which was a softer way of trying to poke at them, to get them to look at what they were doing.
Yeah.
So I went to the women's group, the ECW group, for a year. It decided I could not stand another one of those meetings. So one of the meetings, I asked them, they would pass out cards that had the ECW prayer on it.
Yeah.
They would read it together, and then they would give them back to the person who kept them for the week. And I said, what were the three things you just promised to do? And nobody could answer me.
Yeah.
I said, we go through these motions and none of it is sinking in. But they were dedicated to doing the outreach. They didn't have many children there. But they had a lot of children when they had the food distribution and the parents, and it was a mess. And I said, I think there's a better way to do this. We should pre-pack the bags the day before, except for what we picked up fresh from the equivalent of, we have one here, Capital Food Bank.
Yeah.
They had one there. So we started doing that. And instead of having people have just boxes, because when I got there, they had boxes of food on the table, canned goods in one, and then canned fruit, and all these, and people could go through and pick one of everything they wanted. Well, it took forever, because then people had to pick up all the cans and look and see what they were and all that. I said, this is, and then they had it set up auditorium style, but they were serving a meal while people were to get their food.
Yeah.
So at the end of it, it was like a horrible mess on the floor, because kids are walking around with their food, people are sitting on the chairs, didn't have a place to put their plates down, so they put their drink on the floor, and of course somebody knocks it over.
Yes.
And so I said, this isn't working. It wasn't working for me.
Right. What did you leave there and come to St. Luke's?
No, I didn't. As a matter of fact. When I left, I was there for 6.5 years, and I left. I started an after-school program, because with the food program, I said it'd be much easier to have something for the children to be doing than to sit there waiting in a long line with their parents. So we started 4 days a week, and the two sisters of the former rector were always there helping.
Yeah.
Mother. And that year, I'd been there not a whole year, and I went to some ecumenical something, and the person who was speaking was talking about the situation for Black boys,
Yes.
schools and stuff, and said that by the time they're like, I think it was 9 years old, forget it. If you haven't reached them by then, you're not going to be able to reach them. And I looked around and we had a lot of little 7, 8-year-old, my bad boys, hanging around, coming to the food pantry, coming to church, whatever, but not really integrated into the community. So I said, I can't wait a year to plan this. And so that was like February, because it was around Martin Luther King celebration.
Mm-hmm.
And so by summer, I had a camp program, and we went 6 weeks all day. And it 5 years while I was there, and then they did it one more year after I left.
I see.
So when I left there, I left because I didn't have enough people that were challenging me to grow. And I could see that there were some people there that were ready to take the next step, but not enough to do a group to do that. So I felt like I was doing Christianity 101 over and over and over again, and that wasn't challenging to me. So I had been doing some training. I was on the committee for the prevention of sexual misconduct. I got onto that committee through one of the national churches, women's whatever. And so I got involved with that. While I was there, I was elected a deputy to convention. So that was another opening to see things. And one of the people that I met was in the Diocese of Michigan when they were splitting north and south.
Yeah.
Yeah. So she invited me to apply for this job, and it was going to be on the bishop's staff, but working with congregations on the things that were inwardly facing. And then I had a colleague who was working on the things that were outward facing. So I did that for 4 years and decided if I didn't leave there, I would lose my Christianity.
Yeah.
That was a real challenge, but it gave me a lot of good experiences, because one of the things I learned in that job was that the issues in churches are all the same. The big churches have the same issues that the little churches do. They just have more resources or more issues over the money, not because they didn't have any, but how to spend it. And the other ones had issues. They didn't have enough money to do the ministries that they wanted to do. So
that's because human beings are involved. And from Michigan?
I was in the Diocese of Michigan, and I left. The bishop and I'm too challenging. I'm not going to do stuff that I think is unchristian and stupid.
Right.
So I wasn't on his favorites list.
Yeah. And
one of the things that he had done there was they were rewriting a handbook, personnel handbook for the diocese. And when they got to like the 7th version, they presented it to the Clergy Association, which I was actively participating in. Mm-hmm. And the first page of the thing said, "We are an at-will. This is an at-will church. Therefore, you can be fired without cause, without notice, and without recourse." And I raised my hand very innocently, and he called on me reluctantly because he knew I always was asking stuff he didn't want to answer. And I said, "That doesn't sound very Christian to me." And he was furious. It's kind of like, "Why don't you just sit down and shut up?" You could see that in his face. But I said, "We're never going to agree on stuff like that." And he said, "It's the law in Michigan." And I said, "But that doesn't mean we have to sink to that level. We can do better than that as the church."
Yeah.
And he was not at all happy. And then the fact that he occasionally cussed at our staff meetings and stuff didn't feel very Christian to me either. So I decided before I lost my my Christianity, I needed to move on. And at that point, St. Luke's became open for the second time.
Yeah.
They started their second search. And so
It's the first.
Mr. Epps submitted my name.
I see. Mm-hmm.
And that's how I ended up at St. Luke's, which was a challenge all of its own, different challenge.
And as you look back on that experience, what do you think? What do you think it was like? What do you think happened? And what do you think St. Luke's challenges are today, which are very different from the challenges that you had when you were there?
I don't have a lot of contact with St. Luke's now. Mm-hmm. It probably took me maybe 3 years to kind of emotionally disconnect. I would only go back for funerals if the person was somebody that was close to my family, to my parents. Mm-hmm. So if they were friends of my parents and they asked for me to do the service, then I would get permission from the rector, whoever was there, to do that, because I understood that people will not attach to their new rector if the old one's readily available.
That is true. Yeah.
So I was very careful to not go back there, except for personal friends of the family.
Yeah.
So I really don't know a whole lot. My leaving there was very painful for me.
In what way?
The trigger for me was, I had planned to retire from there. So in my mind, I had 4 more years before I would reach retirement age, and then I would retire, and I would have been there like 12. I would have been there like 15, 16 years at that point. And I think that's long enough. I think people need a change at some point. And I've been working slowly to try and get more people involved in the decision-making and all of that. So that summer, the summer of 2010, I guess it was, we had an annual meeting. But before the annual meeting, I'd gotten a letter from one of the people in the congregation, an email saying that she only sent to me and said, "I know why your father really was removed from St. Luke's." And I didn't respond to her, but I forwarded to the vestry. Because for one, she wasn't there when my father was there. Yeah. She never knew my father.
Yeah.
And for her to presume, but what was so annoying is like, you really think that bishops get promoted and elected by the whole house of bishops to be a bishop if they've been behaving badly in the congregation? I don't think so.
Well, it was also intentionally cruel.
Yes. And then a couple of weeks after that, she sent another one. She said, "Well, I didn't mean for you to send it to the whole vestry. It was just addressed to you. But I don't see why you're putting your mother through all of this mess. She's an old lady and she's nice, and you shouldn't be doing this to her." And that was the last straw. I said, this is not the taste I want in my mouth when I finish my ministry. And so knowing how they were, because they didn't want to challenge anybody, that's why I went to the bishop and asked for him to step in. Because if I had just quit, then they could just continue to do whatever it is, and they would feel no sense of responsibility to me or anything that I had done, or responsibility in not challenging the person who had said those things, which were totally untrue.
Yeah.
In no way she could have known anything, because you can't hear the truth. I mean, if you can't hear the truth, then you certainly can't hear the lie that she makes up. So
yeah, and of course, and what was she trying to accomplish by doing that?
She was angry with me.
Yeah,
because I had challenged her unchristian behavior.
Yeah.
Which is my job.
Yeah, and I recall that as a very painful experience, and the reason I left was because of the way they treated you, and I did not want to be in a worship community where they were capable of doing those kinds of things. And I knew that when I would busy myself at the time of the exchange of the peace, that it was time to go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there were some really good things that happened there. But I remember after one of the annual meetings, one of the older ladies, would have been in my mom's age group, came up and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry they were talking to you like that." And I said, until the whole congregation says this is not acceptable behavior in the church, it will not stop. You're telling me you're sorry that they treated me like that doesn't do anything if you're not willing to tell everybody else that. And my mother's generation were ones that, you go along to get along in many ways. And so they never would say anything. I mean, and after being cussed out in vestry meetings and yelled at in annual meetings and being treated so rudely and people lying. I remember one of the congregational meetings we had in the parish hall. I won't call names, but someone's husband, who had not been an Episcopal and hadn't been there long, said, "Well, we don't even know how the money's being spent." And one of the older members, I can't think of his name right now, I thought of it a couple of days ago. He never said anything. He was I think he came at 10 o'clock and he always sat near the door to the parish hall and toward the back of the church. And I never heard him say much of anything. And he stood up and he said, "The money situation here is the best it's ever been. And we've known more about everything. And if you would look at the report, the monthly report, which is right up there on the board and posted every month, you would know that." So it was the making up stuff just to be mean and hateful and controlling. That it's like, no, this is not the taste I want in my mouth when I retire. So it was difficult. And I was very attached because there were a lot of people that I had married. I brought in young families and all of them and all but one member of the vestry left when I did.
Yeah.
Which is not saying anything good about the community.
None whatsoever.
So I felt badly about that a long time.
Oh, you shouldn't have felt bad about that. It was, I can tell you that I haven't been a member of a predominantly Black church since. And I went to probably the whitest church in the diocese. No, that was very disturbing. So how are you feeling now? What are you doing now that you are retired?
I'm still working almost as hard as I did then.
Yeah.
I'm serving as a chaplain at Riderwood Retirement Community.
I know Riderwood.
And I started that when I was the interim at St. Mark's in Silver Spring, because they're the church that sponsors that. And then when they called their new rector, he was there for 5 years. And when he left a mess, that probably shouldn't be in what is reported. They asked me if I'd be willing to go back. And so I've been back there about 3 years. Except during the pandemic when it was closed, but when it was open. So before I had left there, I had gotten it up to about 20 people. And when I came back, there were 4.
Okay.
And so we're up to about 13, 14 now. And we have a former St. Luke's person who I saw in the corridor who's never come. I saw her in the corridor and I spoke to her and said, "Oh, I think she was I can't remember whether she was a 7 or 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever. But she's never been, and she's known that I've been there. I never had any issues with her, and I don't think she had any with me.
Yeah.
So I don't know whether she's just tired of church or whatever. But I have a good rapport with the people there. It's a very interactive, informal service. 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago, year and a half ago, I was diagnosed with spinal stenosis.
Oh, that's
So
painful.
I can't stand up for a long, long time. So it's really good. They're very, when I was really barely crawling in there, I said, I can't stand. And that was fine because most of them were sitting. I wasn't in a wheelchair, but yeah. So and it was very interactive because I would preach a little bit and then I would say, okay, anybody had those kind of experiences, any questions you had? And people were more forthcoming than in that first round than in the folks that are there now. But there's still 2 or 3 that regularly will speak up and say, because what I found that I try to do all the time now is keep it personal to the people who are there.
Yeah.
So I find much more freedom in preaching now that I've left. Not only I'm doing supply work at St. John's in Mount Rainier. I'm sure they've never had anybody like me before. And I think it's taken some getting used to, but I'm much more personal and in sharing my struggles at being a Christian. I said, it's not like you get ordained and you're holy. No, you still have to work at being a Christian every day. And sometimes you don't feel like it. And sometimes it's hard. And sometimes you wish you could just ignore it. But that's because we're all God's children and we all are in the same world.
Yes.
So I'm always trying to challenge isn't exactly the right word. It's a little stronger than I would say, to ask them, what does it mean to be a Christian? How do you hear the scripture applying to you here now? And I give homework. I used to give homework. So I still give homework. And I don't know how many people do it. I give homework at St. John's also, which I'm sure they never had before.
Mm.
But some of the people are doing it. And I said, a couple of weeks ago, I think it was, pick one thing. If we're supposed to be all part of the same community, how do you reach out? That's your homework, to reach out to somebody in the congregation you haven't seen for a while. Because in the pandemic, they have a very long list of people to be prayed for.
Mm.
And a lot of them have same last name. So I don't know whether they're one family, several families, extended families, friends of families. And I know we have a few people that call in from overseas for the Zoom meeting.
Yeah.
But how do you live this every day?
Yeah.
What are you going to do?
Yeah.
If you say if we pray for all these people here and you haven't seen them for a year, have you called any of them to say, we're thinking about you, praying for you? And I said, so that's your homework this week. Call somebody that's on the list and just tell them you're just calling to see how they are. Because the first call you make can't be, you didn't pledge.
Yeah.
I think you got to give people a reason. Their money will follow their hearts.
That's correct. That's right.
So.
That's right. Well, listen, I
got more than 45 minutes.
Oh, I know. I'm sorry.
I'm not sorry. I'm not.
Oh, okay.
This has been good for me to prepare the different stages of things that I've gone through.
Well, I can tell you that I've done several of these now. This is a very fruitful conversation because you have spent the time to talk about your growth and development.
Yeah.
And you haven't painted a rosy picture. It's a realistic picture of the humanity that's required to be a person of God.
Yeah.
Whether you're ordained or not.
Right. That's true.
Right.
True. Because there's one place in scripture it says that we are all supposed to be priests. All of us are supposed to be priests. And every place that I've been, I have at some point said, you realize there are only 3 things that I can do that you all can't do as baptized Christians. And they always look shocked.
Yeah.
And so I said, these are only 3 things that I can do that you can't do.
That's right.
So we have all of what God requires, or the 99% of what God requires is what God asks for us in baptism.
Right. And, the renewal of the baptismal vows, I always think is the most important aspect of the rite of holy baptism.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember, I thought about you earlier today because I'm taking this, oh God, I'm in a DMin program. I shouldn't be, but
Why not?
because I'm not doing that kind of work. I'm writing, but I'm not doing, but in any event, and we were talking about the preferential option for the poor,
Mm-hmm.
which I see as many people see in a way that's bad theology, in the sense that God's preferential option for the poor is manifested in what we are to do.
And they're not liking that?
No, it's not that they don't like it. I don't think people think of it that way. I think they think of it as, as God sua sponte, making things happen, as opposed to we are God's hands in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And I recall when they talked about the banquet feast in heaven, the image that you used one time many years ago of the banquet in heaven when people's arms are out like this and they're locked.
Mm-hmm.
And the only way that people can eat is if they feed one another.
Right.
And I loved that image. So we're here to feed one another.
Right.
And I tell people all the time, we have two rules. Love God, don't mess this up, and love one another, get along.
And that's so hard. And that's still the message that I
And it's still
am
the
putting
message.
out all the time.
And it's still a hard message.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been, the last month and a half or so, I've been preaching more on our relationships with one another.
Yeah.
And that it's not just about, just keep sliding down off the pillow.
Yeah.
That it's not just, St. John's is predominantly African and Caribbean.
Mm-hmm.
And there are a couple of three people that were there before the church turned over and white flight.
Yeah.
But the neighborhood is becoming more white. Yeah. And I said, how do you invite them in? And then I tell them, the first time I came last September, I had to try 3 doors before I could find a way to get in the church. I said, most people aren't going to do that.
No.
No.
Oh.
So how do you be welcoming?
Right.
And do you really want? And one of the things that they are always talking about, our church family. And I said, how do you get into a family? You can be born into a family or married into a family. I said, but if you're going to grow as a church, you have to have more entry points than that. You have to have many ways that people can become part of the community. So I only talk about church community. I don't talk about a family. They said, well, we're family, we fight sometimes. The bishop's visit was last Sunday, a week ago. And she says, well, what do you fight about? And they were trying to hedge around with, she says, they said, well, all families fight. She says, but what do you all fight about? And it's mostly ethnic differences between the Caribbean traditions, although they're Anglican, and the Africans who are Anglican, but different. And they're not being really honest with each other about that. Yeah. And I have.
Marianne? This is Bishop Marianne.
Yeah. She was asking them.
Yeah. She and I have locked horns periodically.
I have not had a whole lot to do with her because I had never felt that she paid any attention to the Black congregations.
Right.
Or understood them.
Correct.
But this time I talked with her a little bit I think the first time I thought maybe she was growing in that area was with Black Lives Matter last summer.
Okay.
When she went.
And she did well.
Yeah. So I talked to her for maybe 10 minutes before she came. She wanted to know what my experience was there and stuff. And I was telling her, and I could hear in how she shared. And I said, I'm much more personal than I ever was before, because I want people to understand we're all in this together. If you put your priest up on a pedestal, only place they can go is get knocked off or fall off. And we're all working, learning, growing. And she gave the most I like her sermons generally.
Yeah, that's right.
But she gave one that was very personal about her relationship with her father. I don't know if you've ever heard that.
I haven't.
He at one point he just left the family and just went away, got divorced, got him married another somebody. But then he also had an alcohol problem.
Yeah. Oh,
and so she was saying how much she had to struggle with how to love him when he sometimes couldn't be. Oh, shut up. Let me just turn them off. Oh, Mac got it. We've been getting crank calls all day long.
Yeah.
And so she was sharing, and she was using the lessons that were there that really worked well for that. But talking about when he finally got sick and died, when he got sick, she and her sister were there. And she had been working at, even if we can't get along, he is my father, I have to love him. And how do I get myself where I can do that? Because there are a lot of people that aren't very lovable, but as Christians, we're called to love everybody because they're all God's children. And I think everybody was touched by that. And she said that at the end, he kind of reconciled with them. And she thought that they had connected finally after all those years of him not being available to them. And she said if something happened, she went to go visit. If he had been drinking, she'd just turn around and leave because she knew she couldn't communicate with him when he was
That's
like
right.
that.
You know, one time, you know, we locked horns over those Lee Jackson windows. And, you know, she turned to me one day and she said, we were in her office, and she said, Riley, your anger. And I laced into her. I said, I don't have a right to be angry. And she just sat back. And I knew at that moment, she finally got the point. That anger comes from a place that isn't always inappropriate. You know, she finally got it. Anyway.
Well, when I was serving on what's supposed to be the advisory board to the bishop, I had done 2 terms with Chain, and then I had been off, and then I was there for the first. And after 1 year of that, I said, I'm not going to run for any more diocesan offices because I felt dismissed. Anytime I bring up anything, I just feel dismissed by her.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't have to spend my time doing this.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found most insulting, because one of the jobs we had was we had to read all of the paperwork that anybody applying for ordination of any kind. And that year there were 17 people, you know, between those seeking ordination to the priesthood and to the diaconate. And that's a whole lot of reading. Have you ever had to do any of that reading? But it would take at least 2 hours to read everything that they had submitted. So you do that times 17 people, and then you get in the meeting, and we were supposed to start interviewing the people. And she said, all of these people are going to get through. This is more like them just coming to a practice vestry meeting.
Well, I can tell you this.
And I was insulted.
Well,
you expected me to do all that reading, and then you're going to say it doesn't matter what I say, and don't answer any hard questions.
She's already made up her mind. And the other thing is, you know, I don't remember I think the last Black man she ordained was Winder.
Okay. No, she didn't ordain him.
She didn't?
No, he went through the Diocese of Massachusetts.
That's right.
Because Patty, whatever her name was, who was married to the old priest who retired, and the woman who was, and I think it was an appointee of Chain's in another position, both of them were just trying to give him a hard time. They were giving him a hard time. So, one of his mentors is still up in Massachusetts, been in the diocese, Massachusetts a long time. Name skips me right now, but he was very important for me. He's the one, were you at the church when I first went to St. Luke's when I was installed?
Yeah.
He was the preacher.
Oh, yes. I know exactly who he is. Oh, he was terrific, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And he just told them, we can get you hooked up with the bishop here. Because they were treating one of the things he had planned to go up to where he went to seminary, and they wanted him to take a year and go in another congregation. They just made that rule, but it wasn't like he had never been in an Episcopal congregation, because he grew up an Episcopalian, and his rector who's the one who's, this name recall is terrible. He was bishop up in Pennsylvania, New York.
Baxter?
Yes, that was his rector.
Yeah.
So that was his rector when he was in his teenage years and stuff. So it's not like he hasn't spent a lot of time, and he had been a senior warden and all of this stuff in the church. And they want you to leave. It's not like St. Luke's was the only church experience he had ever had.
Exactly.
Which is one of the reasons they had said that. And so he just left it. I told him before because he applied to seminary before he went through any of that stuff. And I told him, you have to make sure that you talk to Chain before you go, and tell him you're going to use this as a discernment year.
Yeah.
Rodman, that's the one up in Massachusetts.
Yeah,
okay. Was the big one. So I was like,
no, she hasn't ordained any black men. I haven't said anything to her about it. I mean, I will.
mm-hmm.
But right now, we've come to sort of a rapprochement, and I don't want to upset it. But
well, I just, after that, I really have had very little to do with diocesan stuff.
Yeah.
And then the last couple of years, I couldn't sit all day at an annual meeting because of my back.
Yeah.
So
that's the condition. They take a needle and they go right into your spine, right?
I had 3 needles shortly after the diagnosis. I went to the emergency room twice when it happened, because it happened a couple of weeks before Christmas, and I'd never experienced pain like that ever before. And when we called the paramedics the next morning, when I finally was able to get back in the bed, because I got up to go to the bathroom, and walking and sitting down was like excruciating. And I sat there a long time because I said, it's going to hurt more when I go to stand up to go back to bed. And so in the morning we called the paramedics, and they came and said, can you get on the gurney? I said, no. No. And that was right when stuff was starting to get really, really busy at the hospital. COVID had not been officially acknowledged, because this was mid-December.
Oh my goodness, that was not a good time.
Yeah, no, it was before that.
All right, I gotta let you go. All right, thank you.
That was spam.
Okay, so you're going to get eventually you're going to get, as soon as I get to it, a transcript. Okay. And you'll be able to go through the transcript. In the meantime, probably sometime next week, I will call you and we can arrange to have the boxes picked up.
Okay.
I'm excited about that. Okay.
Yeah, I found a good picture from Maywood they needed it I was supposed to go do a seminar or something someplace, and they needed, so I actually have a nice picture of me. It's with hair.
Well, there's a nice picture of you behind you too.
But we have aged.
Well, we all have. There's a nice picture of you behind you too.
That was taken at Chuck's wedding.
Oh.
And then when they just sent it to me. They gave it to me as a gift when I went up for I'm his godmother now.
Ah.
When he was about to be ordained to the diaconate, he asked me if I would be his godmother.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah. And they gave me that.
Yeah.
So.
All right. I'll talk to you later. Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you. We have to talk about something when it's not just work too.
Right, I know.
Are you officially retired?
No. Well, yes and no.
Well, I understand that because that's the way I am. I retired.
You know,
twice a year.
I'm as busy as I ever have been, and
I was
sometimes
reading
it's great, sometimes it
all
is.
of your stuff and I was saying, oh, this is so lawyerish writing. What does it mean? So am I supposed to send these back to you?
Yes.
I didn't
Yeah, or you can, I tell you what,
put
have
them in the
Nat,
box.
or put them in the box, yes, or you can
Okay.
have Nat scan them. I tell you what,
Okay.
put them in the box.
Okay, there were a couple of things that you were going to sign as
Yeah,
well.
but we'll assign that at Virginia.
Okay, and there was something that I didn't know what I was supposed to do. On the oral history release form,
Yeah,
that first paragraph, it says, I put in my name and then it says concerning, and then I didn't know what I should put in the concerning line.
your life as a Black Episcopalian.
Oh, okay. All
How
right,
about that?
I can do that.
Okay,
All right.
thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, me too.
You were one of the ones I liked.
Yeah, right.
Do you stay in touch with any of those folks? No.
I see them periodically.
Yeah. Sam Anthony's wife, Gloria, just died about a month ago. He was in Liberia. I mean, he was in Sierra Leone, came back for it. I heard about it, but then I never heard when the funeral was going to be. So
I like her. I like her.
yeah, Nat said he would have gone if we had known when. And we didn't think about it because usually funerals are within the first week or so. But since he was coming over from Liberia, we figured it would take longer than that.
You know, she's smart.
Yeah, and I talked to somebody else. I don't know what she died from.
Yeah.
I talked to Lisa Bodie yesterday, and she said she thought maybe it was related to that her blood sugar had gone either really too low or way too high or something like that. So she was diabetic, but I don't know all of that. Oh, add Janice Warmack to your prayers. You remember her?
Of course. I even run into Janice periodically at museums.
She has a brain tumor.
Oh no.
And they don't think it's cancerous.
Oh.
She called me maybe 3 weeks or so ago. She's having a lot of dizziness now, and we're waiting to see what's the rate of the tumor's growth. But because of her age, it's near the base of her spine and the base of her brain.
Cerebellum.
And so they are not recommending surgery because she's 81. And it would be so dangerous. So I think she's trying to prepare herself for whatever amount of time she has left.
Well, if it's not cancerous, it will only just make her uncomfortable.
Yeah, because she said she actually started having symptoms with loss of taste 2 years ago.
Yeah, because it's putting pressure on those points.
Yeah.
In her brain.
But it wasn't until like maybe a year ago that she actually said something she mentioned it to her doctors, but they were like, I don't know. But one finally said, well, let me get an MRI. And they saw it. It isn't real, it's sizable, but to do that at 81, they thought that would be as dangerous as living with it and trying to keep her comfortable. But they were going to wait for 3 months. Lisa was encouraging to go back because the dizziness she's given up driving. She doesn't go anywhere without
That's not a bad thing at 81.
Right, yeah, no, that's true. But so I'm going to try and see. I can't see her this week. I've got a funeral on Friday. Yeah. One of my Riderwood people who died the January before all hell broke loose, with COVID.
Yeah.
So they're finally able to do the service. So I'm going to try and talk to her maybe this weekend about seeing her next week or
I'll
something.
try to find, yeah.
Send her a card or
Yeah.
keep her in your prayers or whatever.
Thank you.
She was a really good junior warden.
She's
I used to
good.
look
She's
for
good.
her.
No, I used to give her a lot of grief.
She did it.
Human about it.
She just did. But she was very conscientious, and so she really helped a lot. I don't think they've done much with the building structure really since we left.
I've heard bad things. I don't know. I don't keep up really. But
Yeah.
somebody said it's structurally unsound now.
Well, when we started that thing, they were talking about $2 million to make the exterior secure. And they only did parts 1 and 2 of 5. Because we didn't have the money to do it all at once. So we asked them to prioritize it. And so I just finally had this, after I left, I would worry about that. And then I just say, not my problem now. It's not my problem.